And welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, very happy to have back on Elie Mystal. It's been too long. New York Times bestselling author of the book Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, justice correspondent for The Nation, and host of the podcast Contempt of Court with Elie Mystal. Elie, good to see you. And you're awake as opposed to Trump, so that's kind of nice, right? We've got that going.
Honestly, Dean, if my job was to cover this trial, like as a courtroom reporter, today Trump wore a maroon tie and appeared to be embezzling funds from Barron's dowry. Like I would rather die 1,000 times.
So
I could not do it.
What do you think about the fact that 2 days in a row he's fallen asleep? I know this is minor, but when he's made the campaign against Joe Biden, Sleepy Biden, that's kind of why it's so relevant. If it wasn't, it still would be relevant because the guy has been out of office for 4 years. He's aged. He hasn't aged well. He looks awful, objectively speaking. And I don't know if it's a side effect to a medication he's taking or he's just such an old man that he naps a lot. I just don't know the answer any longer.
I mean, I don't, what's the word I'm looking? I'm not the kind of person that's going to criticize another person for falling asleep.
At their own trial, day 1 and 2? Would you be alert? Come on, if you're on trial, you're facing 34 felonies.
I would be alert, but I went to Harvard. I have a certain level of tolerance for boring things happening, drolling out in front of me. I think for most normal people, falling asleep is a thing. It's just a thing. I'm not gonna yell at him too much over that. Look, if we're gonna talk about what he's doing, the problem is not that he's falling asleep. The problem is that he can't stop committing crimes. And he can't stop threatening witnesses, and he can't stop threatening judges' families. And I'm way more concerned about all that than
damn it, this whole hour is about Trump's sleep pattern. I don't know what you're talking about. You saw the topics I sent you. This hour brought to you by Z Sleep. If you need to sleep more, Trump's going to come out with a sleeping. Why not? I'm surprised he probably will come out and endorse a sleeping pill. Having enough time getting to sleep. Look, I fell asleep during my trial. How did I do it? With Trumpazine.
That sounds like exactly the bridge and tunnel carnival barking that he would do. Absolutely.
Right. And he'll be like, and you're owning it. You see, you're so smart. So let's talk about the big things here. First of all, we've talked many times, Elie, about would Trump ever go on trial? And we're here. So what's your reaction to just that? It really has begun. This is the real trial. It's a real trial, not the real trial.
Yeah, it's a real trial, and it's a real trial about a real thing that he did wrong, right? If you don't think that this trial is important, I would just like you to tell that to Michael Cohen, right? Because Michael Cohen went to jail, to the federal penitentiary, behind exactly the facts alleged in this case, right? Trump is accused of misleading, of falsifying his business records about his hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. Michael Cohen lied about those falsifying records to the FBI, and that's why Michael Cohen went to jail. So if you don't think that it's important, please tell me please give Michael Cohen the 18 months of his life back that he had to spend in pokey, right? So that's number one. It's an important trial. It is a thing that would happen to anybody else. Mm-hmm. Which brings me to my second point. This idea that Trump is being unfairly prosecuted or persecuted because he's Trump and people don't. No. This is a thing that would happen to anybody else if they embezzled funds and the state caught them. He lied on his taxes. That's what this is. And you're not allowed to do that. And being so close to tax day, we should all know that, right? You
right.
Can't lie about where you got your money and what you used your money for. And Trump straight up lied. I know that because Michael Cohen says he did. I know that because Stormy Daniels says he did. And I think it's interesting, Dean, my third point. We live in a world, right, where the low rent fixer for the Trump organization, who's already been to federal jail, and an adult film actress have entirely more credibility than the former president of the United States. That is America in 2024, where literally the porn star who lies to the camera for a living doesn't lie about who she lays with, right? But the president of the United States does, and that's where we are. And that's the other reason why this trial is important.
So what do you make about just Democrat messaging in that Trump goes out every day? He's done it 2 days in a row. He said today, I shouldn't be here. I should be in Pennsylvania campaigning. He's half right. He shouldn't be there. He should be in prison already. But he is saying I should be, and this is a Biden production over and over. And I had DNC chair Jamie Harrison on a week before the trial. I go, Chairman Harrison, you know what he's going to say. So will Democrats have a message going back? Like just a little fact. Like, for example, the investigation began in 2018 under Trump when Michael Cohen pled guilty. And he goes, this was Trump's idea. This is the whole thing. Anything like that. And he said, no, we're not going to get involved in that. He did say if he's convicted of felony, we will talk about that a lot. But they're staying out of it. And maybe it doesn't matter, not to the MAGA people, the people in the middle. But I worry that with the amplified media coverage of every day, people hear for the next 2 months, this is a Biden thing, this is a Biden thing, this is a Biden thing, and nothing in response. So he gets convicted, which I believe he will. Some people go like, not Trumpers, I mean, people in the middle go like, well, it's probably politics. This is what politics is today. And that's just life. So I'm not going to hold it against them.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Dean. I think the Democrats make a mistake by ceding the ground, ceding the airwaves, ceding the messaging ground to Trump and the MAGA Republicans. I think they've always made a mistake about that. I think, I just think about how this would be on the other side. Imagine that, Hillary Clinton is on trial, in Manhattan this week. It would be not just 24/7 coverage on Fox and Newsmax and the Wall Street Journal and Breitbart and all the right-wing media organizations. Not just that, but her political opponent, whether it was Trump, whether it was Mitt Romney, would be saying that Hillary was on trial every single day in every single campaign message and every single official address. Everything would be about how the Democrats have nominated somebody who's on trial and I'm not, right? Like that's how the Republicans would play that. And again, all Republicans, not just Donald Trump. I mean, we know what Donald Trump would say, right? But again, you could run Romney, you could run Chris Christie, you could run Nikki Haley, and it would be 24/7 talking about the trial of their Democratic appointment. When she was on the other foot, Biden's like, what, above the fray? Like, this is politics. This is trench war. Get in the trench and start stabbing people. But no, we're going to be like, oh, when they go, whatever the thing is that we're trying to attain, the Republicans are never trying to attain it. The Republicans are trying to win. And when you say
you're in the trench and stab them, it just conjured up a scene from like the movie 1917, something in World War I where you're fighting mustard gas and you're stuck in a real trench and you've got to fight it out to the end there. And okay, I could get Biden not want to talk about it.
The Democrats are the ones in the trench being like, well, mustard gas is against the laws of war. So just so you know, Jerry.
Right. They're like, here's the thing though. If Joe Biden was out on bail, we would hear out on bail Joe Biden, out on bail Biden every day.
Yep.
Donald Trump is out on bail, literally out on bail. I go on MSNBC and say, and the host, except for Joy, go like, oh, this kind of look like, how can you say that? Because it's the facts, because he's out on bail and you guys won't say he's out on bail. If Biden won't say it, the Democrat surrogate should be saying it. And very few want to engage on this kind of issue. So they're going to see that. We'll see how it has an impact. But, you made a very interesting point. Donald Trump is not the nominee yet. That's going to happen in July. By July, it is very likely, not definite, but likely he's a convicted felon. At that point, the Democrats better, and I think they will, because Jamie Harrison said, if he's a convicted felon, we will make sure the public is aware of his status. That was the term he used. I guess it is his conviction status. So I think then you're going to see nonstop. But even then, if it's baked in that this was a political prosecution for so many people, I don't mean MAGA, forget MAGA. I just mean people in the middle who think, I guess this is politics now. Now they prosecute each other. That's what they do. Whatever. Gas was cheaper under Trump. I'm just going to vote for him. That's my concern. Those people.
Yeah, no, that's the legitimate concern. I mean, like the bottom line is that Trump's criminality is baked into everybody's opinion of him already. We already know he's a bad guy. And whether you like him or you don't like him, you've already made a decision about how much you're going to weigh him being a bad guy or not into your political calculus. Where I do think there's some chance for the Democrats to pick up some steam here, is that there are people, I wouldn't call them in the middle, but people who are low information voters, right? People who aren't paying a lot of attention, people who assume, like you say, Dean, that it's all political and it's just a political trial and that's how politics goes these days. But those very same people are paradoxically the people who also have some still respect, trust, whatever belief in institutions, right? And so when an institution, when a jury of his peers says, this guy's a criminal, this guy's a felon, I think there's a chance that some people are just like, well, this is a jury. This isn't just, MSNBC saying it or Elie Mystal saying it. This is a jury of his peers. Of course, then they'll say it's like Manhattan peers or whatever. But like, you get my point. Like, there's that chance that the institutional imprimatur of guilt will make some people who generally don't pay attention to the facts and to the politics maybe perk up their ears. I don't think that it's going to be dispositive in the upcoming election. I especially don't think it's going to be dispositive in the upcoming election because the Democrats aren't hammering him about it every day, because the media isn't hammering him about it every day. But I guess I still have some hope that it could matter. Very, very.
When you look at how much they talked about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden in a made-up thing over and over and over until it became actually embarrassing because the guy they relied on was charged with crimes for lying to the FBI. And even then, they'll still bring it up. I'm chatting with Elie Mystal. So, Elie, what about, you touched on it slightly, the gag order. Now, Judge Marchand, they're going to have an oral argument. They decides to brief it. Donald Trump clearly violated the gag order. It said, don't talk about witnesses, don't make statements, don't have others make it. He made one smearing two definite witnesses, Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen. It's really an open and shut case. What do you think? Why do you think the judge is allowing, now the formal motion was made today by the state, and he's giving Trump's lawyer some time, and then next week he'll have oral argument?
Why do you think the judge is allowing
delayed? Why didn't he just go like, you're in contempt, boom, pay $3,000?
Because the judicial system is cowardly. Like, we have a cowardice system where judges are happy to apply a two-tier justice system, and I've been recently calling it a three-tier justice system, right? There's one justice system for Black people and regular people. There's one justice system for rich white people, and then apparently there's even a higher one for Donald Trump himself. Personally for Donald Trump, because any other person, I even think like at this point, Sam Bankman-Fried, right? Michael Milliken, right? Gordon Gekko at this point would be held in contempt for threatening the judge's children, right? For threatening witnesses. Like, this is so far above and beyond what any other person would get away with without going into jail. You keep saying, as you keep pointing out, he's out on bail. Yeah, this is the kind of thing that gets your bail revoked when you refuse to follow the court's rules. But Trump plays by his own rules. He plays by a special set of rules, and judges keep letting him get away with it. Now, the counter argument to what I'm saying is that arguably Trump wants to be thrown in jail, right? Like, I've heard that argument.
Me too. I think it's a joke, but go ahead.
From especially from like middle of the road Republican type people, the kind of David Brooks crowd, if you will. That what Trump is really trying to do is get a judicial overreaction, right? To throw him in jail, and that will show that he's being persecuted. But that argument fails to me because it's premised on the idea that throwing Trump in jail is an overreaction. And maybe if you're like a rich white guy, it seems like an overreaction. But if you're anybody else, that's just the reaction, right? That's just what happens. When you violate court orders, you go to jail. That's the law for everybody else who ain't a rich white guy. So I don't think that throwing Trump in jail at this point is an overreaction. It's a normal reaction, but it's one the judicial system is afraid to take. And you see this not just from Judge. I mean, I don't have anything against Judge Meacham. I'm not saying that Judge Meacham personally is cowardly. I'm saying the entire system that he's a part of is cowardly, right? We saw this in the previous case with the Tish James case about financial fraud, where again, he could have been thrown in jail multiple times for contempt of court. He hasn't been, right? The system will not hold. They're too afraid of Trump at some level to hold Trump accountable, and it shows. It shows. Their bridges are showing.
I had Pam Keith on last night, who was exasperated by this whole bullshit. And what do you think of the fact that there's no cameras in the courtroom? We're covering this trial like it's 1860. like, and this in on the teletype, the Telegraph said here, and the only difference is we have text and live, so that they're texting out and they're doing live blogs internally with the media. They have one person there, like different reporters, and then it's this just it, and Donald Trump adjusted his tie. Back to you, Bill. It's like, oh wow, and this is what's going on.
I mean, look, I think at this point we need a congressional law. Like, I think just nothing less than congressional legislation will stop this. We need a national law that says that all trials, because they're open to the public, all trials can be televised. Just because the judges won't do it. The judges are, again, I was talking about cowardice. Judges are afraid of cameras in their courtroom because they are fundamentally afraid of the public seeing what they do. Right? Look, one of the reasons why I have a job, Dean, is because the legal system likes to operate in secret, right? And I like to expose what the legal system is doing when it thinks it's in secret. And the lack of cameras in the courtroom is a perfect example of that, where the judges and the prosecutors and the lawyers are trying to get their business done in secret. The argument that, well, if you put cameras in the courtroom, people might grandstand for the cameras as opposed to making legitimate legal arguments. I mean, we have ignored that argument everywhere else in our public life, right? We put cameras in Congress, and then we have to deal with like Lindsey Graham existing and saying dumb stuff, but we deal with it because it's a public hearing, and the public has the right to know and to see what their officials are doing. Similarly, with the court system, it's a public system. You could go, if Adam Classfield, who's doing a great job for MSNBC, kind of doing court reportering, right? If he can go, everybody should be able to go, but there's not enough space for everybody. So that's why God invented television, right? So that everybody could just go see.
We had we all got to see, and anyone wanted to watch it, the case with Derek Chauvin, the police officer who was convicted of murdering George Floyd. There was no grandstanding. That was a very serious trial about now, would Trump make noise and stuff? Perhaps, but it's up to the judge to keep control of him. Would we have footage of Trump actually asleep? Yes, that would be priceless, to be blunt. But I think having the transparency needed here. I will say I do like that they are in a granular detail reporting what's coming from the courtroom, but it's still going through a filter. And you don't get to see it, right? And right,
you're not seeing yourself. You're not seeing the jury reactions yourself. And as you pointed out, like, if Trump has an outburst at trial that causes him to be in contempt and causes him to go to jail, it would be better for that to be on camera.
Sure,
so everybody can see what he actually did, as opposed to his. Because remember, in this world, without the cameras in the courtroom, so often we have to take not the reporter's word for it exactly, but Trump's word. Because Trump rolls out after every trial and tells you what he thinks just happened and tells you why he thinks it just happened. And there's no counterbalance to that because nobody else is in the courtroom. You can't point to the videotape and be like, no. You're in jail because of this, because you said that there. You had fair warning. We don't have that because there are no cameras there. And so it's just, it's a consistently bad thing about our system. And it goes to my larger point that, like, there are so many obvious things wrong with the judicial system and the court system. I would just implore Democrats, like, pick one thing and fix it instead of just letting this crap play out over and over again in such obviously terrible ways. Pick one thing and fix it, please.
I'm telling you, Elie Mystal, I agree. And you know what happens? Trump comes out and says his lie about what happened, and his supporters repeated, as I see on my Substack when they post things like, this case is beyond the statute of limitations and should be dismissed. I'm like, oh, you don't think Trump's lawyers would have tried that, you idiot? But they're just repeating what Trump said. Like, Trump's lawyers never thought of that. If it was beyond statute of limitations, it would have been dismissed by now. That's not even an issue. And whatever Trump says, and it continues. This has never happened before. Actually, hundreds of times they've reported that the DA in the last decade has elevated these kind of misdemeanors to Class E or even higher felonies, depending on the case, the concealment of the crime and what's going on. But Elie, there's something that really concerns me here is that, I really believe before this is over, some MAGA person will either try to bribe a juror, threaten a juror, try to threaten a witness, or bribe a witness. And what I say that is, first, we know what MAGA is about. Secondly, we had a sitting member of Congress yesterday, and he's not the only one. Congressman Byron Donalds from Florida, MAGA Republican all the way, goes on Newsmax yesterday It says, my plea is to the people of Manhattan that may sit on this trial. Please do the right thing for this country. Everybody's allowed to have their political point of views, but the law is supposed to be blind and no respecter of persons. If he would have ended there, that's fine, but he didn't. He goes, this is a trash case. There is no crime here. And if there's any potential for a verdict, they should vote not guilty. He is telling people, a member of Congress, telling people who are Newsmax watchers, who are Trumpers, that if you get on this jury, you have to vote not guilty. Forget the evidence. So to me, at some point, I wonder if they take it on their own and they go, I heard that person's a juror, and they offer them money or they threaten them like John Gotti did. That's my concern. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about jury tampering, right?
Right.
And
Yep.
there are rules, very strict rules, regarding jury tampering and who can do it and who can't and what that looks like. As I read Donald's statement, I don't hear that to be jury tampering. I hear that to be wrong, but I don't hear that to be jury tampering because it's not specific. You know, in the Gotti situation that you just brought up, we're not talking about John Gotti saying like, oh, somebody should no. We're talking about John Gotti going, hey, Jim,
Right.
nice house you have there. Be ashamed if something happened to it, right? Like
Right.
that, and that's the kind of specificity that you need to bring a jury tampering clause. That's quite frankly, Dean, the kind of specificity that Trump gets very, very close to, like very, much closer than Byron Donalds, right?
Right.
And so I'm kind of not worried about him. I'm not worried about Clay Travis, who's basically telling jurors to go perjure themselves in order to sneak into a jury and acquit Trump. These people are allowed to bark as much as they want to bark. I am concerned about the actual witness tampering. I'm concerned about the actual jury tampering that Trump is certainly capable of. And that concern rolls back into my displeasure with the judicial system's unwillingness to hold Trump accountable and hold him in contempt and throw him in jail. Like, because of what Trump has done, because of his desire to tamper with juries and witnesses, that is another reason why he should be in jail with no phone during this proceeding, right? Like, again, if it was anybody else, with a history of trying to intimidate jurors or witnesses, they would be in jail, right? So again, it's not so much that Trump has all these right-wing sycophants and black men who like to get their heads pat by MAGA Republicans like Donald's. It's not so much that they're the problem. The problem is always and always has been Donald Trump and our refusal to hold him accountable for his actions.
Very much so. So we've talked about the other cases. Do you think in your heart this is the only trial we have of Trump before Election Day?
Yep.
That's it.
Yep. This is it. And this trial doesn't result in him going to jail. Like I've said this before, and it's sad for me to say this, because I do think the case is important. I think the case is what's the word I'm looking for? I think the case is legitimate, right? I think that there's a legitimate crime here that should be prosecuted, that, as you pointed out, is prosecuted in many other situations. But here's the thing, Dean. This is not the kind of case that often results in jail time. And as much as it hurts me to say this, Donald Trump is a 77-year-old first-time offender. If he is convicted in this case, he will be a first-time offender because prosecutors in the past have, again, been unwilling to hold him accountable. Well, Dean, we just don't generally put 77-year-old first-time offenders in jail for document fraud. We just generally don't do that, right? Like that's not me speaking out of turn here. Like I think generally speaking, we don't want to do that, right? We don't generally want to put grandpa in jail because he finally lied on his taxes, to get some extra money out of Social Security. Like we don't generally want to be a society that jails the elderly and infirmed. And so so this, while Trump definitely deserves to be in jail for various crimes that he's committed, this particular case and this particular crime is not one that particularly results in jail time for first-time offenders. So to answer your question, not only is this the only trial we are likely to see before the election, because the Supreme Court is going to help Trump get away with all of the other trials between the Supreme Court and Eileen Cannon, Trump is going to get away with everything else until after the election. It's also the trial least likely to put him in jail because of the underlying crime is, while it could be jailable, is generally not viewed as a jailable offense.
Yes, I
which is terrible. I hate saying that.
Right, right. Look, if he's convicted of 34 felonies, a lot of things end up merging. I was hearing Laura Coates talk about it, that some of these offenses actually merge, and he's not facing 4 years times 34. It's much less than that. And at his age, and he can't even say awake, they're like, okay, it's home confinement. But, you mentioned, and next Thursday is going to be the Supreme Court argument on immunity for Donald Trump in the January 6th case. And not what the result's going to be. First of all, what will you be looking for and listening for to give you a sense of how bad this could be? Or is there a sense there's at least 5 of them go, this is BS, and we're still going to wait a month to give it an opinion, but it's going to be what we hope it is?
First of all, the fact that it's happening on April 25th is a travesty.
I know.
And just a straight up proof that the Supreme Court is a corrupt partisan institution, more concerned with protecting Donald Trump than it is protecting the rule of law. Like that. And we know that just from the date of the hearing itself, before Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas's sugar daddy, Harlan Crow, opened their mouths next Thursday, right? Once they open their mouths next Thursday, I know what Thomas is going to say, because Trump needs to be immune, because Ginny needs to be immune, because Thomas is a corrupt and terrible individual. I know what Sam Alito is going to say, because Sam Alito is a racist, Republican, white supremacist uncle who doesn't think that the law should be applied to fellow rich white supremacist men. And so I know where he's going to go. The other 7 of them are who I'm listening for, specifically people like Roberts and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, right? Roberts, I do not think will go for this blanket, always immune all the time.
Yeah, I don't think so either, right?
Right? Kavanaugh, not inclined either to go with that, because you got to remember with Kavanaugh, the most important thing to Kavanaugh is how he looks in the media. Shockingly enough, that's the thing that he cares about most, right? So, like, I don't think from a media perspective, Kavanaugh wants that on his ledger. And then there's Gorsuch, who, I can spend the rest of my life disagreeing with Neil Gorsuch, but Gorsuch generally has a code. It's an awful code, and one that he kind of selectively applies. But the idea that the president of the United States should have this power to never be held accountable for criminal actions, even after they're president, I just don't know that Gorsuch will go for that. Maybe, but I don't think so, right?
I don't either.
I think ultimately the court will reject the immunity argument, but they've already given him everything he needed to delay the case until after the election. So that's what I will go in listening for. However, Dean, and I just got to throw this out there because our friend Professor Melissa Murray demands that I throw this out there. That's a guess.
Sure.
And the bottom line is that there were at least 4 votes to delay this hearing until this point. And so if there were 4 votes to delay it, I cannot say for sure that there aren't 5 votes to give him the immunity that he so craves. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but I know it by 2 of them, you almost already know what they're going to do, Thomas and Alito. Gorsuch, like I said, selectively applies that code. He could easily decide that Trump needs to be immune in this situation. And then you just got to pick up Barrett and Kavanaugh, or Roberts and Barrett. Like, they're different combinations here that get you to 5. And so while I do not think that is where they're going to go, I will be listening very closely to see if there is interest in granting him immunity from Roberts, from Gorsuch, from Barrett. Because if there is, it gets even uglier, even quicker.
So, and even if they decide 5-4 in a way and say no immunity, because the other justices are there, they can slow things down. This will be released the end of June, like the very last day, I assume, of the term, right? So they're
going to delay it as far as possible. This is essentially the last argument of the term, right? So we're into the end game of April 25th is essentially the last argument day of the term. They start releasing opinions, in bulk in, latter end of May. The last 2 years, they've gone all the way to July. And I know that because I don't get to take vacation until they shut up. So I know that they've been taking it out to July, to kind of the week before July 4th weekend. They could, if they're interested and giving him as much time as possible, absolutely, Dean, this could come out on the very last day of opinions, end of June or beginning of July.
And is there another scenario that some people have raised, and I read, and I find it interesting, I just don't know if this could happen, where they actually say, look, there's no absolute immunity that you want for every act, but certain acts, and we have to send this back to Judge Chutkan, the trial judge, to have determination based on whatever parameters they allow. I don't even want to give a speculative, but is that a possibility? Is that plausible? Yeah,
absolutely. It's absolutely possible. And it's, I don't want to say it's likely, but it's absolutely possible. Again, if they're, depending on how much they want to delay this thing, they could further gum up the works by 5-4. Trump does not have absolute immunity, but there are a few, but Judge Chutkan's decision to deny that immunity blanketly was in error. We remand this case back to Judge Chutkan for further findings in terms of the scope of the immunity in this area or that area. Chutkan makes a ruling like the next week. Then guess what? The appeals process starts again, and we go back to the D.C., not even right back to the Supreme Court. We go back to the D.C. Circuit to review Chutkan's amended ruling, and then we go back to the Supreme Court now next October to see if they will hear the case on the appeal from the ruling that they sent back to Chutkan. So, like, again, if they want to spin this out, they can spin this out for as long as they want.
Look, the Supreme Court, they know exactly what Donald Trump did. Every justice up there, Clarence Thomas especially, but all of them know that. They know when Jack Smith, the special counsel, asked for a direct appeal from the trial level of Judge Chutkan, at that moment, if they were serious about this and wanted to protect our republic, they would have taken the case then, and they didn't. And that would have made, the oral argument would have been like in February. We'd have an opinion in all likelihood, and it would be going back to Judge Chutkan, and probably a trial starts.
Another thing they could have done, Dean, never forget, is that they could have heard the case but not granted the stay. Right? They could have said, okay, trial, you guys start going. We'll get to this case on the merits when we get to this case, but there's no reason to delay the trial. You guys have your trial. We'll come back later and say if the trial needs to be stopped because of an immunity concern. Like that was possible too. They didn't do it that way because, again, they're trying to help Trump. I mean, never forget what they're trying to do. Like, never forget what the actual goal here is. And the goal is to make it so that Trump is able to run for president, potentially win, and thus make this entire case moot. Because if he is president, if he wins the presidency, he will instruct his Department of Justice to stop prosecution of himself.
I mean, is it from your point of view that the Supreme Court, these justices, as opposed to some others in the past, some other composition, but the Republicans are no different than political actors? It's no different than electing, Lindsey Graham and Kevin McCarthy and others, putting them on the Supreme Court?
Yes, it's exactly the same thing. And I've been saying that for like my entire career, but it's exactly the same thing. These are Republicans who happen to wear robes to work instead of suits. These are Republicans who are appointed as opposed to being elected. These are Republicans that cannot be removed from offices, but they are Republicans through and through. And they are selected by Republicans to bring Republicans victory in places where Republicans cannot win that victory at the ballot box. It is exactly like having Josh Hawley on the Supreme Court. The difference between having Josh Hawley and Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court is that Neil Gorsuch is like a little bit smarter than Josh Hawley. That's the operative difference.
So is there, when you look at the big system, and I think you may have touched on this in your book, or we talked about this, this really needs to be revamped. We have, it cannot, there's not the checks and the balances that the framers intended at this point. If they thought, it's not like they weren't political. Don't get me wrong. By the end of Washington's second term, half of them hated each other. Like they became really partisan, and there was a lot of anger towards each other and it was partisan. But is this different than what the framers wanted when you look at what's happening now in practice?
Yeah, it's different than what the framers wanted insofar as the framers never thought the Supreme Court would be this important. Like, you got to remember, the framers, I've made this joke before, but like Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 78 says that the Supreme Court should be the least dangerous branch of government. And the next time Alexander Hamilton would be as wrong, he'd be firing his gun up into the air while somebody shot him to death. Like, that's the level of wrong Hamilton was about the Supreme court, remember, the Supreme Court's power to declare acts of Congress and the president unconstitutional, that's not in the Constitution. The Supreme Court made that up for themselves in 1803 in Marbury v. Madison. They gave themselves this power,
kind of
and the
remarkable.
rest of the government was just like, okay, I guess somebody has to do it. But like, that's not actually in the Constitution. So like, it's not so much that the framers didn't think the Supreme Court would be partisan. They just didn't think the Supreme Court would matter, because the actual most important branch from their mind was Congress, and that Congress would fundamentally be in charge of figuring out which laws were passed and which laws were not passed, which laws were constitutional and which laws were unconstitutional. Not some, not at that point 6 unelected people in robes. That was ridiculous to them, right? And so, talking about reform, Congress still has that power. The Constitution is very circumspect about what the Supreme Court actually is. It basically just says there should be a Supreme Court and the judges should be appointed for life. Thank you very much. Can we get back to politics? Like, it's a really, Article 3 is an extremely short section of the Constitution. So Congress has all the power to design what the Supreme Court is, how many justices are on it, how, like the kinds of cases that the Supreme Court is allowed to serve. Congress could say, we're going to pass this law, let's say a national law restoring abortion rights, and the Supreme Court can't review it. We're done. It's called jurisdiction stripping, and we take that out of the Supreme Court review. Congress could do that. So there are lots of things that Congress can do, and the thing that I've been screaming about, like, for my whole career, is that if Democrats don't do this, they just keep losing. Because every single thing the Democrats want, whether it's legislation on guns, whether it's legislation on the environment, certainly whether it's legislation on reproductive rights, every single executive order the president signs, whether it's about immigration and making that system less of a horrible human rights violation, everything they want to do to hold powerful elected officials accountable, including Republican elected officials, none of that survives 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court. None of it. So if you allow these 6 Republicans to have power for the rest of their lives, and you're a Democrat, you get nothing, right? You get nothing, and you like it, or you stop them.
You get nothing, and you're like, all right, let's take it's a great conversation. I've got to take a quick break. We're going to come back and talk about the Supreme Court on Monday, not stepping in because a Black Lives Matter activist was involved, and it's just a remarkable failure for them to act. But again, it's consistent with the right-wing ideologies. So let's take a break. We'll be right back with our friend Elie Mystal right after this. And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're continuing our conversation with Elie Mystal. So Elie, you wrote a great article for The Nation. And again, Elie is the justice correspondent for The Nation. I really recommend it. And this article is really, really good on Supreme Court yesterday is not going to stop a lawsuit against D. Ray Mackison. And he was a Black Lives Matter protester, one of the leaders. And it's just remarkable when you read how you laid it out in 2016 and the lawsuit, and parts of it gets thrown out, but one of it's left, and the chilling effect this will have on protest is remarkable. So share a little bit of the important parts of this case for people.
Yeah, so DeRay McKesson is a Black Lives Matter activist. He organized a protest in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, after the Baton Rouge police murdered a Black man named Alton Sterling. If you remember, this is the man that they had pinned down in the parking lot, completely restrained, and then nonetheless shot him 6 times and killed him. So right after that killing, DeRay organizes this protest. At the protest, some protester throws a rock. We don't know who, DeRay doesn't know who threw the rock. I don't know who threw the rock. Nobody, the rock thrower has never been found. But the person threw the rock hit a cop in the mouth, causing truly, severe injuries, broke his jaw, broke his teeth, like real life injuries to this police officer who was hit by a rock at a protest. And so the police officer sued DeRay, not the rock thrower, not the rock, because they can't find the rock thrower. No, They sued DeRay, and they said that he was inciting a riot, even though DeRay had no rocks, threw no rocks, and didn't tell nobody to throw any rocks, right? So this is clearly not designed to compensate the officer for his injuries. This is designed to keep Black Lives Matter people from protesting police officers. This case has been going on for 7 years. It is a clear violation of DeRay's First Amendment rights to protest and to organize a protest. And yet on Monday, the Supreme Court said that Louisiana, this is where it's happening, could continue its ridiculous lawsuit hunting DeRay McKesson and trying to get him in trouble for being the organizer of a Black Lives Matter protest. And I just couldn't help but read that in connection with what's happened with Donald Trump, who, for all of the criminal trials that he's been in and all of the felonies and the 91 counts, right? Donald Trump ain't never been charged by Michael Fanone, right? Donald Trump has never been charged by any of the officers who were beaten to death or beaten with near death on January 6th by rioters that Trump set there, and Trump told them to go riot. Trump's never been charged in those crimes. Why? Because he can't. Because of the First Amendment. Because for all of the things that Trump did say at the Ellipse on January 6th, he did not say, hey, yo, go beat Michael Fanone to death. And since he didn't say that, Michael Fanone cannot sue Donald Trump. But what's the word as as Nicole Hannah-Jones would say, what's the word that's silent here? And the word that's silent is white. The First Amendment, as applied to white people, cannot be used to prosecute Donald Trump for inciting the riot on January 6th. But white people are more than willing to ignore the First Amendment and ignore DeRay McKesson's First Amendment rights and prosecute a Black Lives Matter organizer for injuries at a rally that he did not ask for, cause, or consider was a likely possibility.
And as a practical matter now, as you point out in your article, and it's a very powerful point, that in the 3 states of the Fifth Circuit, which are Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, if you organize a protest, you have to be fearful that if anyone gets hurt, you could be sued. So this will have a chilling effect. And it's not rich white people protesting. They don't have to protest. They have the power behind the scenes. It's generally marginalized communities, often of color, are the ones that are doing the most protesting.
And remember,
Black Lives Matter or Palestinian Americans or the allies of Palestinians, we've seen a lot of that. So if anyone gets hurt from these peaceful protests in any of these 3 states, you could be sued as the leader of that protest for things you didn't want to happen. You didn't tell anyone to do it. They just did it.
And remember, when we say they, we're not even sure who the they is, right?
Right.
Because it doesn't have to be somebody who's part of your organization, right? So you could have a Palestinian Lives Matter protest, right? That's entirely peaceful. And then John Fetterman could show up, throw a rock at a cop to try to embarrass the Palestinians. And all of a sudden, the Palestinian who organized the protest is in trouble with the law, right? You can have a Black Lives Matter protest and neo-Nazis can show up, throw rocks at the police to make you look bad, and all of a sudden it's the Black Lives Matter protest that is implicated, that is held liable for those injuries. And that's not me saying it. That is the dissenting judge on the Fifth Circuit, a judge named Don Willett, who, when disagreeing with what the Republicans did, pointed out that this standard is so chaotic that literally anybody who is against the protest movement, who is hostile to the protest movement, can use this ruling to implicate and hold liable the protesters.
It's really can be so effective by people who want to destroy what you're doing. I can't even believe this ruling now. You know, I think it was Justice Sotomayor was the one that it was her area.
Yeah, it was a denial of cert. Sotomayor was just like, what are we doing? Like,
right. So is there a chance that it comes back up to the Supreme Court and they actually, after many years of pain that DeRay has to go through, actually stops this case or no?
I think it's likely that they will, because the standard is stupid. Like, again, this is a standard that they want to apply to DeRay, but eventually it could theoretically be used against white people too. So that is why eventually the Supreme Court will, I think, overturn the standard. But they're going to make DeRay go through all of it, right? They're going to make him go back to Louisiana. They're going to make him stand trial in front of a jury that's not his peers, that a bunch of white, good old boys from Louisiana. He's going to get convicted at that trial. Then he's going to appeal to the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit with James Ho and Kyle Duncan, they're going to deny his appeal. Then he's going to have to appeal it all the way back to the Supreme Court. This whole thing is going to end up costing him every dollar he has, and eventually 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the Supreme Court will be like, oh, actually, you know what? This is a bad standard.
Right. And there's no compensation for his for whatever he had to pay out of pocket, or the money he had to raise that he probably would have, I'm sure, wanted to use for other more substantive things to help people's rights. Instead, he has to defend himself on an hourly rate, even though the ACLU is helping him. Last thing.
It's also the chilling effect on other protesters, right? If you're going to try to organize a Black Lives Matter protest because DeRay is, now distracted, busy trying to fight his own legal battles, do you want to now go organize a protest in Louisiana? No, of course you don't, because you might be held liable for all of it for as long as this case exists, which is exactly why this case exists.
Exactly. And the very last thing, we have 2 minutes left today, not to get in detail, but today was Supreme Court oral argument. You were covering it. It was about the January 6th defendants, and over 300 of them were charged with a violation of a federal law, 18 U.S. Code 1512 C2. Don't look it up at home, but it's obstructing the proceedings. And it seems like the conservative judges, though, yesterday had no problem in affecting future protests, chilling effect if it's Black people. But here they were really concerned, some of them, about the idea, the chilling effect this could have on peaceful protests if you're going to charge them when it's white people doing a January 6th protest. It was remarkable to hear this.
All of a sudden today, the Supreme Court was very concerned that January 6th rioters were being unfairly prosecuted under the obstruction statute, which was never meant to cover riots. It was only meant to cover, according to Neil Gorsuch, the deletion of business documents, and was never meant to cover riots. Literally, Gorsuch analogized the attack on the Capitol that killed 6 people, injured many, beat up cops. He analogized it to, and he wasn't stuttering when he said this, pulling a fire alarm in the Capitol. Oh, it's like Jamal Bowman attacked the Capitol, isn't it? No, it's not, Neil. It's not the same thing at all. You're an asshole. But that's where they are. That's Gorsuch. That was Alito. That was Roberts. People think Roberts was reasonable. He wasn't. Roberts was all about letting the upshot is going to be, and we're going to find this out. They're going to make this decision in June as well, that the January 6th protesters cannot be charged with obstruction of Congress, and instead can only be charged with the trespass offense and those kinds of things.
So some people are going to get their sentences, and one of the charges against Trump might go away. It depends. It's just kind of remarkable, isn't it? Well, Elie, it's so great chatting with you. I appreciate it. Read Elie's stuff at The Nation. He's a correspondent there. And also follow him. You're still on the X, the Twitter. Follow him there at Elie. And thanks so much for being on. It was great chatting with you, my friend.
Nice to talk to you again, Dean. Have a nice one.
Have a great day.